You might look at this whiteboard and say there is a lot of stuff on it. And the reality is there is. It's the combination of 3 different conversations today with different folks inside relatively the same operating environment. When you look at this stuff, you might say, how the heck are you going to accomplish it? How the heck are you going to make sense of any of it? How will you take action and move things forward? And the story I want to tell is around eliminating before you accelerate. You've got to eliminate. You've got to organize pieces of information. And I'm not going to move backward because I don't want you to see all the detail behind this. But you organize the information into clusters, validate an understanding around those specific clusters, and then figure out what your next logical steps are relative to solving those specific clusters. The challenge with that approach is many times the next logical steps involve other people inside the organization, and they may be aware of it or they may not be aware of what their involvement is. So you may need to schedule a meeting where you pull people together and say, we have a challenge around, let's say, communication as an example. It's one of the most common challenges that exist inside organizations. And the reason communication typically sits as a challenge that persists, I think Jody Mayberry said this best once on a podcast episode that we recorded, is the most common mistake with communication is believing that it actually occurred. Now, why do we make the mistake around believing it actually occurred? Well, one of the challenges there is we believe that when we said something, that someone heard it the way that we intended it. Pause, take a second, and ask a question and validate understanding. Validate their understanding of what you communicated, or validate your understanding of what they communicated to you. So on this Friday, let's think about what we can eliminate before we accelerate. Because if we tried to do everything that's on that board behind me, we would fail. And the reason we would fail is because we'd be attempting to do too much. So let's deconstruct it, break it into smaller steps, identify next logical steps so that we can take those next logical steps. Sometimes that requires getting together in a meeting. Sometimes it requires working in a collaborative document. And sometimes it requires, and this is one of those things I've launched recently, whiteboard as a service, where you get someone like me who can guide you through a conversation. Now, why would you want someone who's a Jets fan to guide you through a conversation? If you want someone who has dealt with a bit of adversity, stays committed to their team, and is willing to work through tough things, look no further than a Jets fan who likes golf, who launched a business 8 years ago. And so to pull this all together, if you are inside your organization and you feel like you're having the same conversations over and over and over again, make sure you get the people involved in thing that you're looking to solve for and ask them questions. Don't share information, because sometimes when you share information, we just make assumptions around what we know or what we think or what we perceive. Start with a couple of questions. Validate an understanding. Confirm that you've heard it properly. Then identify next steps so that you and they can start taking them. The biggest problem I see inside companies who struggle with this is they attempt to solve for a specific problem using the wrong tool, or they attempt to apply the wrong tool in the wrong context. As an example, earlier this week we talked about decision making and leveraging a tool like a 2x2. A 2x2 can help reduce blind spots, improve perspective, shift perspective, and help you make more effective decisions. Now, you still may be wrong, but you won't be operating in a situation based on making a decision purely driven by the urgency of a situation, or purely driven by the importance of a situation, or purely driven by the energy that it gives you, or purely generated by the impact. And if you're interested in looking at those 2x2s in more detail, just let me know in the comments tracker, and I am happy to share the tracker that I use there. So that's a 2x2 that we would use for decision making. If on the other hand, we're not really sure, there's a lack of clarity around the specific thing that we're focused on, a problem solving framework might be helpful. And that's the hexagon. And you can look at the simplifying problem solving post in the newsletter for more information on how to use that. But that hexagon starts with what, then moves to who, then why, then how, then when, and then short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan. The third tool that's important, at least for me, is around communication. And if it's a communication challenge, then we've got to ask ourselves these questions. And it's just a simple square. At the top of the square, who are we communicating with? Who's in the room? At the left side of the square, what do we anticipate are their objectives? On the right side of the square, what are our objectives? And then at the bottom, what are our desired next steps? So apply the right tool in the right place to create leverage and accelerate speed to impact. Hope you have an awesome Friday. Let me know if this kind of stuff is helpful. What I'd like to do is change this into a Q&A type thing. So if you've got questions, if you've got something you want to work through, a specific example that you want to work through, share it with me. We can anonymize some of the data and look forward to seeing some of those questions come through. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?